Welcome into the Action Network podcast presented by FanDuel. I'm your host, Brendan Glasheen. Today, UFC betting preview, UFC 288 going down from the Prudential Center in Newark, New Jersey, joined by Billy Ward, former MMA fighter, one of our great contributors at Action Network. We will get into his luck ratings, which he delivers each and every week for the UFC cards. Billy will decipher whether or not there's an edge in terms of what the line presents for each fight. So we'll dive into that. You can find that at actionnetwork.com, Action Network app. And today, special guest filling in for Sean Zerillo, we have Action Network senior editor Dan Stupp with us today. Gents, as we normally do, Dan, I'm sure you know the drill from tuning into the pod and being with us at Action Network. We will decide who we like for underdogs. We'll get into props. We have the fight of the night, Burns and Muhammad. We'll break that one down, and then we'll finish up with quote-unquote best bets, which that's always a unique discussion on this show because we think every bet on UFC pod is a best bet. So, but first, main event, Aljamain Sterling, Henry Cejudo, very tight line here. Cejudo, Billy, is the favorite at minus 120. Sterling, the hometown kid, makes his return. He's from Uniondale, New Jersey. He's at minus 106 at FanDuel. Which way we lean in here? I know Aljamain is not shy to be very outspoken, and he's very fired up to be back home.
Yeah, this is a really fun fight. I know a lot of people have been kind of down on this pay-per-view, but I think this is a tremendous fight, very intriguing. Sterling is the current 135-pound champion. Henry Cejudo retired, in air quotes, 3 years ago as the champion, having never lost it. So, we really have two guys who could make the rightful claim as the lineal or the legitimate 135-pound champion. But, one of those guys has been out for 3 years, and the other one has been active fighting. You referenced the luck ratings a little bit earlier. I think we could kind of make a case that both these guys have been a little bit lucky to have the record they have. Sterling won the 135-pound title with a disqualification against Petr Yan, defended it with a very close split decision. I thought it was the right call, but you could certainly make a case that it wasn't. And then his next title defense was against TJ Dillashaw, who came in with one arm and basically never stood a chance in that fight. Cejudo on his side, he has a couple of real close split decisions in title fights, one at 125, 135. Again, nothing that I would say is a robbery or he didn't necessarily deserve to win, but it wouldn't have been a big leap to see him not win either of those fights. So from a luck rating standpoint, I don't think there's a ton to split this one. So when we have close fights like this, I like to look at, and Zerillo and I discuss this most weeks, of the three facets of MMA, who's got an edge in two of them, and that's striking, wrestling, and then grappling once it gets to the ground. Sterling is so much bigger. He's got 3 inches of height, 3.5 inches in reach. Looks like he might even be a lightweight. Like, it'll be really interesting to see how he makes the weight or how much longer he makes the weight. So I think that's more than enough to give him a striking advantage. Cejudo has some knockouts on his records, but they've really all been set up with the threat of the wrestling. He's not just coming out there and piecing people up with his striking. Cejudo, 2008, gold medalist in wrestling, clearly the better wrestler. But I think Sterling's better once it gets to the ground. He has better submissions, excellent back takes. So that makes it tough for Cejudo because I don't know if he's going to want to take things to the ground. He certainly can, but whether it's going to work out for him once it gets there is a big question. In Cejudo's wrestling style, those guys expose their backs a lot when they're trying to get up and they're trying to change positions. That's really tough against Sterling because he might have the best back takes in MMA. He, backpacked Petr Yan for very large portions of both of their fights. That's just kind of his thing. So all things considered, if Cejudo was fresh and active and we knew he hadn't lost a step, I'd say this line is about right. It would be about a pick 'em. But we don't know any of those things. He could be a bit slower. He's 36. He hasn't fought in 3 years. He's small for the division. Whatever percent chance you apply to Cejudo being not his best self, that's roughly your edge, I think, in the Sterling side. So minus 111, I like him. Wish I would have got on when you could get a little bit better odds, but it's been bouncing around all week. So by the time you listen to this, you might get minus 105 or even money on Sterling. But I'm more than happy with it at minus 111.
Okay, so many questions, Dan, surrounding this fight. Cejudo, the age, the layoff, as Billy mapped out there. The other questions about how can he go up against Sterling and his grappling technique. How do you break this one down, and where do you see an edge potentially?
Yeah, no, I think Billy kind of sold me earlier in the week on Sterling. I think it's the right play here. I think even without the layoff and the age and other concerns we would have for Henry Cejudo, I think Sterling's the right play here. Like you said, the scrambles. I think some of the submissions that Cejudo probably doesn't have a whole lot of experience with. Like you said, he's a Olympic gold medalist wrestler, but he's facing, some really funky jujitsu that he probably hasn't experienced a whole lot in his career. There's also a stat that's going around this week, and I've mentioned it a few times, that when fighters are 35 or older, they're 2-28 in UFC title fights at 170 pounds or lighter. And I think that really just underscores that in these lighter divisions, like anything you start giving away with age, which is usually your chin and your speed and things like that, the younger guys are just going to capitalize on that. So, I don't bet strictly on kind of the trends and stuff, but I think that's a really telling one. And the fact that both of those victories, the 2-28 record, were at 170, we really haven't seen the older guys really excel in these lighter weight title fights. So one more reason I like Sterling in this fight.
Yeah, and to your point with the lighter weight classes, just making weight is harder the older you get. It's, most of us can attest to. It's harder to keep that weight off. And all the damage you're doing to your body with those dehydrations, every one is a little bit harder than the last one. You take a guy like Cejudo, who in 2008 was making weight time and time again for wrestling matches, and then continued to do that for essentially his whole life, right? He's been wrestling since a kid. Each one of those is a little bit harder, and each one takes a little bit more out of you. So that's another factor.
Okay, main event on pay-per-view. Looking forward to it. Sterling and Cejudo. Very, very short favorite in Cejudo. So we'll find out if that, as Billy said, keep an eye on the price. It could change over the next 24 hours. On to our favorite underdogs. Billy, a lot of close lines here, as we said with this fight, and that's kind of the theme for this card. Where are you finding value with the underdog this week?
Yeah, I don't really love any specific underdogs here. I'm going to mention two real quick. Braxton Smith is about 140 fighting Parker Porter. I'm going to mention him with one of my props. I also am going to have a little bit of a sprinkle on Joseph Holmes at plus 132. Holmes is fighting Claudio Ribeiro, who's 0-1 in the UFC and looked great before he got to the UFC, but he was fighting a really, really low level of competition. So that doesn't mean he can't look good against better competition, but it means we haven't seen him do it yet. Holmes is 1-2 in the UFC, but he's beaten a UFC level competitor at least once. Holmes is also much taller and longer and has the grappling advantage. I'm not sold on him. I don't think Holmes is a great fighter by any stretch, but to get plus money against a guy who's never won a fight in the UFC and isn't some huge prospect, I'll take a little nibble at that one.
Dan, underdog that you might like this week?
Yeah, I'm pretty chalky this week, and I'll probably be on a lot of favorites and prop bets. But one I hate to say that I like this bet, because I hate that I like this bet, but Chrome Gracie versus Charles Jourdain, they opened the pay-per-view main card. Gracie's coming off a 3.5-year layoff, so of course I'm going to back him, because that's a very smart play. But honestly, he's older. He didn't look real great in his last fight. I think maybe we're getting a bit of a discount on him just because he did look so terrible. But again, that was 3.5 years ago. So maybe we should put a little something into it. But really, he's a jiu-jitsu guy, and he's not just a Brazilian jiu-jitsu black belt. He's kind of the next level jiu-jitsu black belt. He really, I think, just needs to get to this fight to the ground once or twice. And against a guy like Jourdain, who has takedown defense of less than 50%, I like his chances over 15 fights or over 15 minutes of getting this fight to the ground. You give him a limb, a neck, I think he's going to probably get the submission here. So him at plus 152 at FanDuel, I think you can get him via submission at plus 230. I like those bets.
On to the fight of the night, one fight that we have targeted on the main card. It's no surprise that we're targeting Gilbert Burns and Bilal Muhammad. Burns at minus 130, Muhammad plus 106. While Muhammad, Billy, has his stock has risen slightly here as of late. And you map this out on your luck ratings write up, again, actionnetwork.com. You can find it titled UFC 288 luck ratings at the top. You think Burns is slightly undervalued, and there's a chance here to wait on Burns. His striking, there are a lot of boxes he checks to have an edge in this fight.
Yeah, this is a really tough one. I'm a huge fan of both these guys. This should very obviously be for the next welterweight title shot, but that's not how the UFC works. Also, they're making it a 5-round fight despite it not being a title fight, which honestly, it's probably the biggest factor here. This fight came together on just 12 days notice, or maybe 13. I forget exactly when they announced it. Not a ton of time to prepare for a 5-round fight. You know, Gilbert Burns, super high level jiu-jitsu guy, as Dan mentioned with Kron Gracie, not just a black belt, like a multi-time world champion in jiu-jitsu. Bilal Muhammad, probably the better wrestler. Kind of comes down to the striking. I like the strides that Burns has made in his striking as of late. He's looked much better in that area. Traded toe for blow for blow with Hamzat Chimaev, which was very impressive. Could have won that fight depending on how you judged it. And there's a bit of a narrative about Burns having cardio issues, which I get. I love to rag on jiu-jitsu guys for their cardio because they only do 1-round matches. So when they have to come back out, it's a whole different world, But with that said, this is Burns' third fight in 2023 already. Last one was just a month ago. That's a double-edged sword because if you're the kind of guy who stays in the gym, stays ready, having those fights back-to-back just means you're in better shape. He didn't take a ton of damage in either of them, so he should be fairly good to go. But a lot of guys, after a fight, they want to take a week or two off. And when you only fought a month ago, that means you haven't been training. I'm betting that Burns is in the former camp because he was the one asking for this fight, asking for it to be 5 rounds, all that.
Right.
Which makes me think he's going to have a conditioning edge here. So I'm going to bet him in rounds 4 or 5 or by decision at plus 200, which is, one of my favorite bets on FanDuel when they give you those multiple round props. Obviously, could also take Gilbert Burns live at any point in there if we get a better price than that. I'm not sure that we will. And then the other sneaky factor, Bilal Muhammad is, as you might guess, Muslim. Ramadan just ended early April. My guess is his training schedule is pretty disrupted. It's going to be a really hard weight cut for him because he didn't have anything on the books coming into this, hasn't fought since October. So if either of those factors mess him up a little bit and sap his cardio, that's another huge edge for Burns the later this one goes.
Yeah, that's exactly what Burns said a few weeks back. And as you said, that was before they actually made the decision to make it a 5-round fight. But he said, because now I can get a finish. Muhammad unbeaten. Dan has passed 9 fights, making a strong case for a title shot. But now if Burns can get that finish, he puts himself very much in that discussion. How do you break this one down and how do you want to bet it?
I've lost a lot of money betting on Bilal Muhammad, so of course I'm probably going to jump on the bandwagon at just the wrong time. But I actually like Muhammad here. I started the week really liking Burns, like Billy was saying, just being in camp and doing the 5-round fights. But I'm starting to think maybe that could work against him, just kind of being at that fight-ready state for such a long period this year. I just feel like eventually there's going to be a dump. And I think maybe he's overestimating how or underestimating the cardio Muhammad's going to bring into this. I think he's going to probably be in good shape. I think he probably remained in good shape. I think he's fought through Ramadan before, so I'm not real concerned about that. I think the big difference here, I think he's going to be good with the takedown defense early, and I think Burns is going to use a lot of energy on that. I know Billy kind of liked Burns in rounds 4 or 5 or decision. I actually like the flip side of that. I like Muhammad to kind of start to wear down Burns early, kind of with the takedown defense, maybe pepper him with some shots and eventually start to take over. So I like him in 4 or 5, around 4 or 5 in decision. And I wish it was plus 200 like Billy's bet, but at plus 170, I'm really happy with that bet.
All right. Fascinating with the Ramadan angle too is very interesting. And
it's tough with stuff like that because you don't really know. Like he could have bbeen training at night and staying on his diet and all that stuff, or he could have been taking it easy and just like Burns. So both of those are clearly double-edged swords. And with the bets that we've given out collectively, the smartest play might just be to lay the juice on the over since we both think this one's going to go late.
let's explore the prop market over at FanDuel. Tons to find when it comes to UFC. Billy, where did you find an edge in the prop market potentially?
Yeah, this is, almost to prop squad levels of juice. I'm looking at Braxton Smith by first round KO at plus 340. His tapology is really weird. He made his pro debut in 2014, lost to Chase Sherman. Crickets for 8 years. Just disappears, doesn't fight, who knows what he's doing. Comes back in 2022, 5 straight first round victories in the last 11 months. I think all of them were all of them knockouts. I think all were in within 3 minutes or something crazy like that. So he's fighting Parker Porter, 3-3 in the UFC. All 3 of Parker Porter's losses, first round. Parker Porter's kind of this big plotting heavyweight, wears you down with volume. I think this is either going to be Braxton Smith finishes him pretty much right away, or Porter outlasts him down the stretch. So if you wanted to hedge this one, Parker Porter live after round 1, if he manages to survive, I think is a great angle as well. But we've got one guy with one way to win fighting someone who only has one way to lose historically, and you can get plus 340 on it. So love that one.
Dan, favorite prop for UFC 288?
I've got a pair of them from the prelims. I had mentioned I was kind of chalky this card. So I was looking for props that maybe would get a little closer to even if I were lucky. I like Kennedy Zajuku against Devin Clark in the prelims. He's minus 190, but inside the distance, he's plus 110. I think if he's going to win this, it's probably going to be versus knockout. We've just seen Devin Clark really inconsistent. And I think his stock's a little high coming off a win. And then also Chaos Williams. He's fighting Badeo, a guy who just really isn't UFC caliber. Chaos is minus 310. I think that makes sense. He should be a big favorite, but him to win by KO is only minus 120. I think that's his most likely path to victory. So while a minus 120 prop bet probably isn't the sexiest thing, I actually think there's a ton of value there. So I like Chaos Williams via KO and Zajuku inside the distance.
All right, as we normally do, we wrap with our best bets. Kind of, sort of. We think these are all best bets, everybody. I'm got to make sure I get that in for Zerillo, because Zerillo wouldn't be happy if I didn't mention that. So, Billy, if you had to give out one more no, go ahead. What'd you got? What do you say?
As I like to say, it's our last bet.
Yeah, our last bet. That's good. Now, sometimes Zerillo will say, I feel really good about this one. I actually did make it my best bet. So he would give that caveat. Your final bet today, Billy, for UFC 288.
Yeah, I think, 51-49, this probably is my best bet on the card. And that's Drew Dober by knockout at minus 110. He's fighting Matt Frivola. They call him the steamroller. These guys have no interest in defense. They have very limited interest in grappling. They just want to stand, throw heavy punches, see who falls first. But Drew Dober, much to my amazement when I broke down this fight at the Action Network, has never been knocked out in the UFC. I thought for sure at some point somebody would have caught him because he just slugs and slugs. But, the chin has held up to this point. Frivola has 2 quick knockout losses and seemingly gets hurt in every single fight. Like, he's been dropped multiple times in fights he ended up winning. Dober's athleticism and power is just too much where you can afford to play that game and get clipped and expect to come back and win. So Drew Dober, knockout, minus 110. This one's almost certainly going to be a knockout. And when we got 2 guys playing Rock'em Sock'em Robots, I want the one with the better chin.
All right, Dan, take us home. Your best bet.
We're coming from the cut from the same cloth. I actually like Dober here too. I'm cool with him on the money line just in case this somehow turns into a wrestling fest and things slow down. But Dober via KO, pretty much even money. I will take that all day. Billy broke it down perfectly, but I think even if Frivola goes in there not expecting to have this slugfest, a guy like Dober is going to be able to goad him into it. The crowd and Jersey's going to crowd him into or goad him into a bit of a firefight. So Dober via KO, Billy and I in agreement. I love that bet.
All right, gents, great stuff. Thank you very much. Again, you can find Billy Ward's luck ratings for UFC 288 over on actionnetwork.com in the Action Network app. And he titles this one, The Undervalued Fighter to Bet Before It's Too Late.
Oh, that one's gone. Sorry, guys.
What a headline!
The vote on that one.
Yeah, well, still great headline. So but for the other fights that are applicable, you can check that out. Dan Stupp, Action Network senior editor. Thanks for filling in today for Zerillo. We appreciate it.
No problem, my pleasure. And we'll still have all of Sean's pre-fight stuff on Action Network, so check that out.
Very good. All right, that's it. Thank you very much, folks. Enjoy it. Enjoy the prelims. Of course, the main card. We've got the weigh-in coming up on the video side as well, so check that out if you need more UFC content. For Billy Ward, Dan Stupp, Brendan Glasheen, thanks for tuning in to the Action Network podcast presented by FanDuel. We'll talk to you again next week.